Pokemon cards are not stopping to drop, though will it continue? Now, before I answer that, in today's video, I'm actually gifting one subscriber this Tatsuguri illustration rare. Now, if I reply to your comment and I add the Alchemy emoji, then well done, this card is getting sent your way. And hey, if you are a first-time viewer, my name's Phil and I cover topics relating to Pokemon investing. Feel free to subscribe. Though I think the Pokemon market has some serious things happening at this stage, and it doesn't look like it's slowing down in any way, shape, or form, especially when seeing the prices of some of the booster boxes. All right, so here I'm on the Ninetales, right? And you can see the Ninetales in April was selling for 21 US. Actually, what's even more interesting than that, if we pull this into the 6-month graph, you can see that the high point for the Ninetales was actually $34 in February. So right there, you can actually see that it did go up a fair bit in price and reach the high point of 34. Now, what's really interesting, this card was like an $8 card in 2024, right? So, I mean, to go from $8 to $34, you know, that's a pretty significant jump. Now you can see, check out the price retrace or the reversal. You can see from 34 US all the way down to $15. So you can see it really has come down a fair bit in price, and it kind of makes you wonder, how low are some of these cards going to go? Like, is it just going to continue to dip? Is there a limit to how far they can go? Because what I am very certain of is that there's going to come a point, which I kind of think is getting, sooner rather than later, where people are going to be like, wow, these cards are just way too cheap. And we can kind of see that some areas and some people are now buying cards. And we can see that there's kind of pockets of cards coming up right now, when everything's going down in reverse. But it's a very interesting time right now in the hobby. Same thing when we look at the Milotic special illustration rare. You can see that it was selling for 152 US. And right now, very slowly but surely going down to $99. I mean, that's dropped like 1/3 in value. Actually, no, it has dropped 1/3 in value. So you can see huge price reduction, dude. For a special illustration rare, for such a cool card, you can see that the market is really now responding to this. People were just thinking, was I overpaying on cards? And here's the thing that's kind of happened in the hobby at the moment. You just have so many pockets of cards that are just so expensive, okay? It wasn't like you just had 1 or 2 cards over 100 US. You had so many cards in the Scarlet and Violet era that were fetching these wild price points. So at one point, things had to kind of calm down. And of course, we are now seeing that play out in real time. Same thing when looking at the Latias EX special illustration rare. You can see the high point in the market was $264, though you can see from here, check that out, man, right now selling for $151. So you can see these Surging Sparks singles have really fallen. Obviously, Surging Sparks had a reprint. Now, to get the sealed product is quite hard, but you can see that, these cards are definitely coming down in price. Same thing when we're looking at the Terapagos special illustration rare from Stellar Crown. You can see it had a high point in September for $116, though right now this card has gone down substantially, dude. This is selling for $42. Right now, that is a pretty good price for, one of the top chase cards of Stellar Crown. When it was releasing, everyone thought that this was going to be the most desired card. And you know what? I did think that as well, but you can see it's just easier to pull than people expected. And not only that, it doesn't have that desire that a lot of people wanted. Now, moving on to the Charizard from Paldean Fates. This one is one that we need to look at. Now, why this card for me is kind of interesting is because, when Paldean Fates released, dude, this Charizard was like meant to be the top chase card, but of course it became Bubble Mew, which, now looking back, I do think that's a fair decision by the community. And I'm kind of grateful that a Mew overtook a Charizard because, right now we're all just saying, oh, Bubble Mew, everyone loves Bubble Mew, but that's a pretty big deal when you think about it. The fact that the community actually decided, hey, we prefer Mew over Charizard is a huge thing, man. Like, and Charizard just has this wildly big fan base, man. It is so big. So that's actually a big thing. But you can see here, check this out. Last 3 months, right? Selling for 194 US in April. If we pull this into the 6 months, you can see that it did have a high in the market in January for 217 US. That you can see right now selling for $159. I do think that that is a pretty good price considering how hard Paldean Fates is to get. I mean, the sealed product of Paldean Fates is quite challenging to find at reasonable prices. So again, that is a pretty decent price, I think, considering how desired Paldean Fates is as a set. But interestingly, when we're looking at some Japanese sets, right, Pokemon 151, the Japanese version, is very interesting right now. You can see selling for $168. right now selling for 158. So very interesting, man. I mean, English 151 is just slowly rising, but the Japanese version is really not rising like the English version. Really unique time for the Japanese market at the moment. Same thing when we're looking at Shiny Treasure EX. You can see selling for $72, right now selling for $68. So you can see that the Japanese market right now is kind of in a good position for, people who want to buy it. I mean, with Black Bolt and White Flare, the Japanese sets are getting really cool at the moment. A lot of collectors love purchasing Japanese because, you have the guaranteed pull rates. And of course, it's usually a bit more price friendly than English sets. Now, when speaking of Japanese Pokemon products, this does bring me to today's video sponsor, which is Bai. Now, if you've never used Bai before, it's a Japanese proxy shopping service that lets people outside of Japan easily buy exclusive items directly from Japanese marketplaces. And yes, that does include Pokemon cards, Pokemon figures, plushies, and much more. Now, with Bai, you can actually browse platforms like Mercari Japan, Rakuten, and tons of others, all from the one account. You can just search for whatever you want. For example, Japanese Pokemon cards, and you'll see a huge range of listings that you probably won't find anywhere else. Now, once you make the purchase, the seller ships your items to Bai's warehouse in Japan. Bai ships to multiple regions, including North America, Oceania, and Europe. Now, this is really useful with the new sets like Black Bolt and White Flare because Bai makes it much easier to get these. Now, the best part is if you do want to try it out, all first-time users of Bai get 2,000 yen off with the link in the description. A big thanks to Bai for sponsoring the video. Now let's jump back into it. Now, interestingly, the Gardevoir from Scarlet and Violet base is one to look out for as well. Now, I'm on the year graph of this, and you can see it did rise a fair bit in price. So why this card's interesting is because when Scarlet and Violet base came out, a lot of people thought that this and Miriam would be the top chase cards. Miriam, which I will take you through in a second, has fallen off a cliff. And of course, this card as well has never found some real high points in the market, but of course, it's still performing okay. You can see that this special illustration rare in August of last year was selling for $22. Man, that is a bargain for an SIR, but of course you can see it did rise all the way up to $54 and right now selling for $41. But you kind of wonder, is this card going to fall down a bit more? Now, I do have to say, it is unlikely that this card will go down heaps in price because, $41 is a pretty accessible Pokemon card because, considering it is an SIR, it is still at a bit of an accessible price point, right? We do have some cards that balloon out of control. We all know these, the Umbreon from Prismatic Evolutions, Bubble Mew, Pikachu. These are all really expensive cards. So I do think that it really doesn't have that much room to drop as well. So considering, that the whole Pokemon cards and the whole Pokemon boom has kind of happened. Now here I'm on the Iono special illustration rare from Paldean Fates. You can see in the last 3 months, this card was selling for $67 US, right now selling for $55. Not a huge price decrease, but this once was the top chase card of Paldea Evolved, which is kind of weird to think about now. And a lot of people just say, oh, it's trainer cards and this. But people forget, man. People forget that this was actually once that card for Paldea Evolved. But of course, Magikarp has now completely overtaken its thunder. And of course, this card right now, I mean, you could buy, nearly 4 of these cards for the price of 1 Magikarp. So it's kind of weird how the market shifted. Now, also, if you do have some questions relating to Pokemon cards, feel free to ask them in my channel's Discord. We've just surpassed 9,000 members and we've built a really great community. You'll also be first in line to hear about Discord exclusive giveaways. The server invite is in the video's description. And of course, as I was saying, the Miriam special illustration rare, I'm on the 3-month graph. You can see that there was some weird, not sure if it was market manipulation. There was maybe some level of a buyout here because whenever you see a graph like that where it has this huge spike and then a big price retrace, it's just bizarre behavior, okay? So you never kind of want to trust the card that has that huge spike in price too quickly. It's always something you just want to, have your wits about you when you see that, right? Because you can see in the 3 months, it was selling for $22 US, went all the way up to $40 US, and right now it's back to $23 US. So very bizarre behavior. But you can see in the last year, if we ignore what happened, during that period, you can see last year selling for $19 US, went all the way up to $41 US, and then of course right now still it's at $23 US. So you can see the Miriam, which once was the top chase card of Scarlet and Violet base, has definitely never found its feet. And, it was really interesting because when this card released, for Scarlet and Violet base, a lot of people thought, oh, is now the time to buy? But you can see right here, it's always good to kind of wait when singles release because, this card was selling for a lot more than that when it released back in 2023. And you can see right now selling for $23 US. That is a pretty good price point for anyone who wants to add this to their collection. And of course, you can see one that is actually kind of going up in value. I'm going to pull this into the month graph, but it is the Cynthia's Garchomp. You can see selling for $109 $193 just 1 month prior, and right now selling for $223. I do think this card is a really cool chase card, man. I think Destined Rivals has an interesting future. Right now, it's pretty available. I think a lot of people love Destined Rivals. I think Destined Rivals was positioned in a good place because, you know, all those people that kind of revisited the TCG because of Pokemon 151, maybe with some of the sets, they lost a bit of interest because, you know, they love their nostalgic sets. There's a few people who stuck around that really love Pokemon cards, but in terms of your kind of millennials and those people that really like nostalgic Pokemon cards, Pokemon 151 and Destined Rivals are on the same category because Pokemon 151 is a revolutionized base set. You know, all those collectors from back in the 90s kind of all looked at Pokemon 151. It drew back so many of those people into the TCG. And then of course, for, you know, around 2 years, we didn't really have a nostalgic throwback until Destined Rivals, which of course is a Team Rocket set. And the last Team Rocket set was over 20 years ago. So it did pull in a lot of older fans, which is really cool. But of course, a lot of the cards inside the set are very desired as well. So right now we're in a very unique position. I do think that the Pokemon market and singles right now, they have fallen quite a fair bit from their high points. Now, has to be said that the high points were probably at a ridiculous price point. I do admit that. But at the same time, it's like, how low can some of the singles go as well, man? Like, can they keep dropping, right? I mean, even though that the high points were probably a little bit ridiculous, right now, some cards have had some pretty big pullbacks. I mean, the Ninetales, for example, that's now a $15 card. It once was a $34 card. So, you know, those price kind of shifts are pretty big. Same thing with the Milotic as well, selling for 150 US, right now selling for $99. That also is a pretty big price reduction. So I do think right now is an interesting time to be involved in the hobby. But of course, more than that, there will come a time where a lot of these cards kind of reach the bottom, and then it's going to be a kind of chaos because a lot of people are going to say, oh, now's the time for me to buy because I can see them all coming up in price. So I think right now, just keep your eyes around what's happening in the market, and of course, we're going to see what happens. In fact, one thing that's come up from all of this is just how interesting Pokemon is as a franchise. I mean, the fact that Pokemon is still here after so many generations is truly incredible. And one of my favorite things about Pokemon is how much they catered to players, and they even introduced the ability to trade between generations. In fact, this was before DLCs and software updates. Pokemon actually created a way to trade between generations, and they did this through some real clever development. Though I think an interesting question is, what is the actual longest journey that a Pokemon can take? And the answer to that is revealed right within this video here. Within this video on screen, I go over the exact journey and showcase the actual longest journey a Pokemon can take. Click the video that's appearing on screen on my second channel, Philip's Trick Room, and I'll see you on the next video.